What's doing, everybody? Welcome to First Class Fatherhood. I'm Alec, and before I hit you with today's interview, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the link in the description so you can listen to all of the interviews I've done with so many tremendous dads, including Dana White, Deion Sanders, Tony Hawk, and so many others. Now let's get going with today's interview. Joining me now, First Class Father, Errol Doebler. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
Thanks, Alec. Appreciate being here. This is about as important a podcast as it gets, talking about fatherhood, because we're not talking about it enough these days, it feels like.
Yeah, right on with that. Let's start like this. How many kids do you have and how old are they?
I have 3 kids. I have a 7-year-old son, Henry. I have a 6-year-old daughter, Camille, and an 18-month-old daughter, Levi.
Wow, okay, yeah, brand new there. Still, you guys you going for number 4, or are you all done?
No, man, I'm 52 years old, so we're done.
All right, sounds
we're done for now.
You got the older one, the 7-year-old, involved in any sports or activities just yet, or no?
Yeah, so we started. So all the kids, to include the 18-month-old, we swim, right? So I grew up by the water. We live just a couple miles from the ocean. We've got a pool, so swimming started almost immediately. Then we did, wrestling, surfing, and some jujitsu. And then my daughter, she's we've got him in piano, and my daughter is an artiste for sure. So we're gonna put her in ballet and stuff like that. So we kind of, just what we feel like are the lifestyle sports right now, right? Just swimming, being comfortable with some contact, and enjoying nature.
Yeah, good stuff, Errol. If you could, please just take a minute here to hit my listeners with a little bit about your background and what you do.
Sure. I'm originally from Long Island, New York, which all Long Islanders are always proud to put out there up front. Went to school at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis. From there, you get commissioned as an officer. So I was on a ship first. I was on the oiler, USS Monongahela, for a couple years. And then I transferred over to the SEAL teams, where I was a platoon commander at SEAL Team 4 and SEAL Team 1, got injured on deployment, went to the private sector for a few years, selling copiers and software, all good stuff. 9/11 happened, joined the FBI, spent 13 years in New York City, 13 years in the FBI, mostly in New York City, working counterterrorism. And then, got a little frustrated with some big government stuff, and said it's time to go out on my own. And I started my leadership consulting firm back in 2016, and we've been rolling with that ever since.
Yeah, what an incredible journey you've had, Errol, and thank you for your service, of course.
Thank you.
And along this ride here, then, about how old were you then when you first became a dad, and how did becoming a father change your perspective on life?
Well, I was 45 when I first became a dad, so I got started late. How did it change my perspective? Without being too cliche, it made me a better person. And what I mean by that is, and everybody will certainly relate to this, when you start seeing behaviors in your kids and you recognize them and you go, oh, where'd you learn that? Oh, wait, you learned that from me. So, and my son will be just like me. He is, for better, for worse. He's going to be me. So I pay extra careful attention to him. And when he does something, the first few times I was like, where did you learn something like that? And, he doesn't even know how to answer that. And my wife would be standing beside me going, well, that's exactly what you do. So how did it make me a better person? You see a mirror in yourself, or at least I do in my kids, and I quickly adjust my behaviors that I see in them that might go down a detrimental road as they get older. So just if you're paying attention, it can't help but make you a better person. So from a very selfish standpoint, it's really had me check who I am as a human being. And am I doing everything I can to be as good a role model? Because for better or for worse, they are going to copy what I do. So.
Yeah, very well said, Errol. And I had Wim Hof on the podcast back on episode 342. I know you're a Wim Hof Method instructor. When did you first become aware of Wim Hof and the method, and what got you, made you get involved to want to become an instructor?
Well, oddly enough, so I do leadership consulting, and I was doing a weekend retreat for a client. And the CEO called me and said, hey, I want you to implement Wim Hof Method into the 3 days. And I said, okay, but what's the Wim Hof method? I had no idea. So he gave me a guy's name who he wanted me to call up. That guy's name was Brandon Powell. And Brandon spent about 2 hours on the phone with me talking about it because I'd done some quick research. And, the first thing you see is some guy in a bucket of ice water. You're like, whoa, what is this? And it just kind of resonated with me. So that's how I got turned on to it. As soon as I got off the phone with Brandon, I started the process to become a certified instructor, which takes about a year. They don't just give them away, which is nice. And I used it from a personal level initially. And the story I tell the people is after about a week of doing it, my wife said, I don't know what this new thing you're doing is, but you are never allowed to stop, right? And it was just because the stress was coming down, a little more measured. And then I just found it was a great tool for my leadership practice. So I introduced it to my clients for behavioral change and all sorts of stuff. So it's really been all encompassing for me, and I love it.
Yeah, I really love Wim's whole philosophy on life. I love his perspective, where he comes from. And what I'm kind of curious, Errol, is especially the coldness part of this, that he seems to defy like nature when he does this. If young guys, is this something that they should be trying to learn when they're heading into buds? Could the Wim Hof method help these young guys get through buds? Would they have an advantage if they use the Wim Hof method?
Well, I think they're doing, it's been a while since I've been in touch with what's going on at Buds, but from what I understand, they're really introducing a lot of new stuff to the candidates. And I think some of it might have to do with, cold exposure and how to maintain your breath. I'm not sure, but I will tell you this. It probably would make a difference, right? Because you don't have to, obviously, you're sitting in the cold. They'll send the whole class in the cold and say, okay, you can all come out when somebody quits. Well, okay, then you're kind of like, is anybody going to quit? So if you can not endure the cold, but thrive in the cold, understand what it's doing for you, what it could do to you. Yeah, I think it would have helped a lot, because you had to really summon a lot of grit at Buds when they put you in the cold water. And you don't need to summon all that grit to survive or to thrive in the cold. Right now, I spend lots of time in ice baths, and it's never like this, and that's how you do it at Buds. So yeah, I think it would help. So if there's any aspiring Buds trainees out there, yeah, do it.
Yeah, there seem to be a lot of them nowadays.
There does.
And what about, just curious, what do you think is a safe age for young kids, or like for dads that are out there doing it and their kids, like you said before, they mimic you, they look up to you, they want to do what you're doing. What's a safe age to introduce this to your kids for them to start doing the ice baths and practicing this type of stuff?
So we implement it as soon as they're ready. So, I would be out there, I would do my ice baths, and they'd come and watch me. And they'd start by sticking their hands in, and then they'd leave. And then they'd start by then they'd go both hands. And little by little, while I was always there, they would just say, well, I want to try to get in. So I let them naturally do it, right? I don't say it's time for our ice bath, let's get in there. Sometimes my son he's something else. He'll get in. He was in there for almost 2 minutes one time, and I had to pull him out, right? Because you have to be careful, especially at that young age. I'm like, oh, that's enough of this. But the answer to your question is, I just kind of let it happen naturally. We're obviously always watching them. What they want to do, we kind of let them do, and it's really progressed nicely. And the same with the breathing. We're a little more proactive on that, but what we're trying to do is just create the principle of, hey, we feel a certain way. Let's go take some deep breaths. Let's lie down. Let's sit down. Let's take 10 real deep breaths, because that will help us feel better. That will, whatever it does. So we kind of naturally try to incorporate it in our kids' lives, and now it just kind of becomes part of what we do.
Yeah, good stuff. And I think just being in this age of the technology, it gives so many more of us access to so much more information that we didn't have before, especially when it comes to thought process, breathing methods, how to handle stress and stuff like that. And I think it does a lot of good. And just to bring this back into you as a dad here, I'm always curious with the Frogmen here, how they handle discipline as a dad. What type of disciplinarian are you when it comes to being a dad? And is it different than the discipline style that you grew up with?
I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky guy. So, and I enjoy laughing and playing with my kids. But my dad was not a huge disciplinarian. He was the light of my life. He passed on about 6 years ago. And I always thought, I wish he had kind of pushed me a little bit harder in a couple of these areas as it came to just some personal behavior and certainly academics, right? I was at best a lazy student, and I, gosh, regret that, as most of us do as we look back on our academic career. So what we try to do at my house is we try to be disciplined around behaviors, right? We set some behaviors that we think are important, and then we focus on that. And then we find the rest kind of falls into place. So, be kind is one of those behaviors. So if I'm really hard on them anywhere, it's when they're getting after each other. Okay. And now they're starting with the snide comments and things like that. So from that standpoint, I'll get hard on them, but mostly because we just make it clear. We always say, look, this is what we do in this family. We're kind. What don't you understand about that? And having a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old have to answer that question, like literally, I'll ask it. That's punishment enough, right? So they get it. So I'm disciplined. We're disciplined around behaviors. Try your best, be kind, and pay attention. That's kind of what we focus on right now. And those branch off into a lot of areas. So if they're doing those things right, lots of other good things happen. If they're not doing those things right, we'll bring them in, we'll sit them down. So, in those areas, I could be pretty tough. Generally speaking, I'm probably the softy of the two between my wife and me, but I try to help her out. But she's running the show here, so.
Yeah, good stuff. And just like you, I was very lazy in learning growing up, and now at this stage of the game, I got such a thirst for knowledge. I'm a big reader. I try to read at least a book every week, and that hit me later. So I guess everything comes in its time. I have 4 kids myself, and they're all at different levels of interest in learning, and it's different for each kid. And you mentioned there kindness as one of them. What would you say are some of the other top values that you're hoping to instill in your kids growing up? Well,
again, like we said, kindness, pay attention, hard work, right? Those are 3 big ones. And inside of kindness, we try to talk about a lot of things. We talk a lot about emotions at a very young age, because that's one thing that I struggled with growing up. I was overly emotional. I let things get me too riled up, and I would just act on them. And what we're trying to instill in them is, to be kind to somebody, recognizing how you feel and recognizing how they feel is really, really important, because that's the genesis for all of our actions, right? If we're feeling a certain way and we don't recognize it, we just act, well, it's random how we're going to act. So we really focus on that a lot, okay? Hard work. We want to be smart work as well. So one of the things, and I just appreciate all the team guys you have on. It's fun, and it's a great place, great outlet to hear what we all think. But I'm sure you've heard once, if you heard it a million times, is slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So when we talk about working hard, we kind of try to implement that, right? Because now they're at the table doing their homework, and they just want to get done as fast as they can and say, I was the first one done, right? And we say, well, not really, because you may have been done with your 10 problems, but you got 5 of them wrong. So you went too fast. Now I've got to go back. And if you had just done them correctly, slow and smooth, you'd be done faster. So those are some of the things that we're really trying to implement. Again, behaviors, I think, that they can just take everywhere.
Yeah, good stuff. And talking about like I guess one of the things with leadership, I would say, is trying to figure out the strengths and the weaknesses of each kid. Because for my child, one of the things I recommend to a lot of dads out there or parents is the 5 love languages. And I know it's one that you think of doing with your spouse to kind of find their love language, but I recommend doing it with your kids as well to kind of find out how they receive love, how they give love, and it gives you a little bit better insight onto how to help discipline them and how to help cater to them. And talking about books, getting to your book here, The Process, Art, and Science of Leadership. How does your book differ from other leadership books? And how can parents or dads use the book to help lead their families?
Well, I think my leadership book it's a little different in that, anytime a SEAL writes a book, you're gonna hear some of the same things, right? Because we're all cut from the same cloth. We generally believe very much the same things. But what I do in my book is I lead with all my failures, right? I decided to kind of go the other way and say, look, here's all the things that I did wrong. I've got a nice resume. It reads very nicely. That's great. I'm proud of a lot of the stuff I did, but that's not why you should listen to me. listen to me because of some success I had in spite of the things I did. And what I did was I just went back into my life and said, all right, here's the things you did well, and here's the things where you kept screwing it up. Was there a common theme? And that's where I came up with the process. Talk about emotions and personal culture and behavioral guidelines and planning and understand why it's so hard to do these things. They were everywhere. And so I said, well, there's a process to this. There's a thought process to leadership. You cover all these things, you're going to find your answer. So it's a process. It's not, here are 5 kind of random but important traits. Do these things and you'll be a great leader. They may not necessarily apply to everybody, but this process will apply to everybody. So that's where it's a little different, right? It's not quite as sexy. I throw in some good stories, to get people a little jazzed over some of it, but that's kind of where it separates itself. And, look, when you write a book, when you start a business, you've got to have your target audience. And I get it. It's important. But in my heart of heart, I believed that this process of leadership was for everybody, to include the single mom, the stay-at-home dad, everything in your personal life. Okay, just so happens I can apply it to business and combat in all its various forms that I've seen. But the principles, the process is the same. And that's where, and I feel very happy that I'm hitting the mark, because I get single moms coming up to me and saying, I read your book and it was awesome. It's right where we need to be. Thank you for talking about emotions and how important that is, right? Parents and community leaders and coaches, all the places that are outside of the traditional business stuff. That's where I really wanted it to have impact. And I think it is. So if it differs at all, I think those would be some of the areas.
Yeah, well said, Errol. I'm definitely going to drop a link in the description of this podcast episode so my listeners can get over there and check it out. One of the things you mentioned there, too, is your failures. And I think that failure is so important to development. I think kind of like in this age right now of parenting, we're kind of removing that from a lot of the kids. We're not giving them opportunities to fail. We see it as such a negative. We obviously, every kid gets a trophy philosophy. And I think this has created some real havoc in our society as a result of that.
And I kind of get now, you're right, and I agree with you. And I think that there's too many safeguards. I don't even think they allow jungle gyms on playgrounds anymore, right? And that's a shame. But I will say, watching your child fail is about the worst thing, and how they react to it. For me as a father, and I really saw that when we started doing some surfing and wrestling. Boy, my son finally figured out he was getting his clock cleaned, and watching him cry, I wanted to take, my heart was, I'm going to take you out of this because I can't bear to see you go through this. However, you don't, and you understand that he's going to get better, and it's my job as a father to tell him that, like, no, you're not quitting. You're not allowed to quit. You made a commitment to this season. And we'll finish the commitment. Now, at the end of the season, we'll see where we are. If you don't want to do it again, that's okay. And, obviously it gets better, right? And he had a tough first season wrestling. And, I just was wondering, is he gonna come back? And, fortunately, they're going to reopen the wrestling. He says, okay, I'm ready to wrestle again. Well, part of that's because we let him get in there and fail and work it out and work through it and get that camaraderie with the other kids. If we had not let him fail, would he have? He definitely wouldn't have tried again, right? Because that would have been the way he does things. So yeah, we're big on letting him get out there, letting him fail. It's heart-wrenching. He's a bit of a maniac, as is my daughter, right? The physical stuff, they're on their scooters. You want to scream, stop doing that, stop doing that. But you're like, so they finally crash bikes, right? Because they weren't paying attention. Me and my wife will run and they'll ride bikes in front of us. And we're constantly screaming, pay attention, pay attention. And finally I said to my wife, we just have to stop. It's going to happen. Let's just let it happen. And what is that? Them not paying attention, smashing into each other and falling. Right? You would have thought the earth ended, but they were fine, but they had to do it. They had to fail. So yeah, it's hard, but it's important, and we embrace it.
Yeah, and Errol, I'm right there with you too. And I think all dads too. And it's part of the growth of becoming a father too, is learning how to let go of some of that stuff.
Oh,
My older two guys wrestle. My oldest son, he's a chess player. He's a school wizard, and he challenged himself by doing the wrestling. And he got tossed around the mat like a rag doll, and it was tough to watch. But like you said, they start to learn, and as long as you give them the opportunity to fail and learn, I think it benefits them. Like when I was a kid, we played street football all the time. There were no parents, no referees, no coaches.
right.
We had to make up all the rules, settle all the fights, and call
Oh,
penalties and do all that stuff. And we learned how to solve those problem solving skills at an early age. And we kind of removed that from our kids, when we hover over them, too much.
well, you're right. And so we're doing homeschooling right now, not the virtual option. We just decided we didn't like any of what we saw on many levels. So we said, until this thing blows over, we're going to just take care of business at home. And we partnered with a couple of families, and that's a hard decision, but it's a like-minded philosophy. And that's one of the things we said, we're going to let them go, right? We're going to let them figure stuff out on their own when it's playtime. We're not going to be out there, monitoring them, just like when you and I were growing up. And, sometimes it gets a little dicey, but it's all working out, So we're trying to kind of bring some of that back a little bit, since we have a little bit of control.
Yeah, right on there. And all right, you got the book out. You're doing the Wim Hof method instructing. What kind of goals or plans do you have here for yourself for the future, Errol?
Well, we're going to keep growing the business, right? We're about 4 years in now. It's everything we hoped it would be. So now we've got to go through continuing to scale, continuing to have impact on the people who give us the opportunity to share our story, and then really just making sure the kids are getting everything they need. Once again, I know it sounds cliche, but there is no more important thing in our lives, right? This business stuff will work itself out. All the other stuff is going to work itself out. We focus on making sure we're giving the kids what they need as far as a good, loving environment, places to make mistakes and do all those things. So that's what we're focused on, right? We've got to make the money. We've got to grow the business. But more importantly, we've got to keep this family strong together in one good, super cohesive unit.
Yeah, great stuff. And on that, last thing I'm going to hit you with here, Errol, I'd love to ask all the dads that I get on the podcast, what type of advice do you have for that new dad or for that about to be father who's out there listening?
Well, I think the advice I would give them is there's plenty of time. And what I mean by that is not don't do things with your kids because you'll have plenty of time later. It's the opposite. It means when your kid's tugging on you and wants to throw the ball for 5 minutes or tell you a story for 3 minutes, you have 3 minutes. You have 5 minutes. You may have convinced yourself that you're so busy that you don't. Trust me, you have it. And there will be no better 5 minutes or 10 minutes or even 30 minutes when you feel like you can't spare time for a breath. You have time. So when I say my advice is there's time, there's plenty of time. It's when they need you at that moment. Just stop what you're doing and go do it with them. All right? You don't have to do it for 4 hours, okay? But you have 5 minutes, you have 10 minutes, you have 15 minutes to give them when they said, can you do this with me? Can you listen to what I'm saying? There's plenty of time. And I think that would be the advice that I would give new fathers, because we convince ourselves that we're just so busy and we're so important, and we're not, and we're not.
Yeah, very well said. I love the message. This has been an honor for me. I got to say, Errol Doebler, you're a first-class father all the way, and thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time here on First Class Father.
It's my pleasure, Alec. Thank you, and please keep it up. This is awesome.